Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Eyeshadow and Etihaas. I am Ruchika Sharma, and before I go ahead and introduce today's topic to you, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to everybody who saw the first episode of Eyeshadow and Etihaas. That video has got more than 1,000 views, you guys, and my heart is full. Thank you so much. And in case you have no idea what I'm talking about, I am going to link the first episode here and in the description box so that you can click on the link and go and watch the first episode. Before I go ahead, I would also like to thank everybody who flagged that there was an audio issue in the first episode. I have listened that you couldn't listen, and therefore the audio of this particular video should be a lot better. For those of you who are watching this for the first time, as I said, I am Ruchika Sharma. I'm currently pursuing my doctorate in history from Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU. I have previously completed my Masters and MPhil in history, also from the Center for Historical Studies, JNU. Besides this, I also teach history for a living. Please note that there are a few sources on today's topic that have been listed in the description box that you could use either to cross-check whatever I blabber over here, or you could just read them in case whatever I speak here sparks your curiosity on the subject. Now that all that is sorted, I cannot wait to introduce today's topic, you guys. Today we will talk about Bhadreshvar, a small port town located in the Gulf of Kutch. But if Bhadreshwar's history is anything to go by, it's anything but small. Apart from being a very important port town, Bhadreshvar is also the area where the oldest Islamic monuments were constructed. Yes, you heard that right. Not in Delhi. It's not the Qutbuddin Aibak's Congregational Mosque. The earliest Islamic monuments came up in Bhadreshvar, which makes sense as well, considering Islam first made inroads via Gujarat through trade, and it was later on that Islam came to the subcontinent as a political force. These monuments are absolutely fascinating, you guys. And I have been wanting to go to Bhadreshvar for a very long time now, just to gaze at these marvelous monuments. And I will be discussing the history of Bhadreshvar and its absolutely fascinating monuments while doing this smoky eye. Because everyone loves a smoky eye, you guys. Everyone. #fact. Chale phir. Gujarat etymologically comes from the term Gurjar Rata, where Rata is the prakritization of the term Rashtra. Thus, Gurjar Rata literally translates to the land of the Gurjars, who were a tribe of cattle herders, often doubling up as militia. The Gurjar Pratiharas ruled this area from the 6th to the 8th century, where the region also included parts of Rajasthan as well as Malwa. But the region shrank quite a bit under the Chalukyas, who ruled the area during the 12th century. Now remember, guys, these Chalukyas of Gujarat are not to be confused with the Chalukyas of Kalyani or the Chalukyas of Badami. Different people, similar names. The region of Gujarat has historically been the land of immigrants, with settlements being established for almost 4 millennia. The region has had a curious mix of conquerors, pastoralists, traders, as well as agriculturalists. Its long coastline has, however, ensured that the traders and the trade economy defined the region for most of its history. Rulers of the region were often influenced by and provided security to the merchants and traders. Since the bulk of revenue in the region flowed largely from trade. Since trade was such an important economic activity, ports on the Narmada River and the Arabian Sea became quite significant. But the problem with ports is that they often silt up. So if before the 10th century, the port of Bharuch or Bhrigukacha, I'm a 4-year-old to giggle at that. So if before the 10th century, the port of Bharuch or Bhrigukacha, situated at the mouth of the river Narmada, carried the bulk of the Gujarati trade, from the 10th century onwards, it was Khambat or Cambay, which was located in the Gulf of Khambat and became a principal port town. Cambay. Now, Cambay, you guys, was extremely important, since it was not only an Arabian seaport, but was also very well connected to the overland trade route which joined Cambay to Pakistan, Afghanistan, all the way up to Central Asia. Now, this overland trade route transported the stately beasts, the horses, to the subcontinent and beyond. The Arab merchants and travelers that carried the bulk of this trade referred to the port as Kanbaya. But wait. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. How do the Arab merchants relate to the history of Gujarat? Samira Sheikh informs us that Arab merchants made contact with Gujarat as early as the latter half of the 7th century. This was also the first time in fact, when Islam as a religion made contact with the subcontinent. Later, the Arabs in Sindh did carry out a few raids in the 8th century in the region of Gujarat, but it was largely trade that brought in more acculturation in Gujarat. The acculturation by 9th century was so deep that Muslim officials came to be employed in the service of rulers such as the Rashtrakutas, who ruled parts of Gujarat, Malwa, Maharashtra, as well as Karnataka from the 8th to the 10th centuries. Political expansion of Islam in North and Northwestern India happened largely on the coattails of the trade with Gujarat, more specifically the horse trade. Now, horses were brought to the subcontinent primarily for war, as locally bred horses were frankly not the best. You see, horses are not really native to the subcontinent. They require cooler climates, large grasslands, none of which the subcontinent provides. So, Central Asia or Arabia did it best. The subcontinent's default royal ride or war ride was the wise elephant. From the kingdom of Magad to the kingdom of Mauryas as well as the Guptas, everyone wanted to control the forests of Jharkhand and Orissa just to gain access to the elephants. And even though after the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, horses for war became par for the course, the elephant continued to be the royal ride. If the Delhi Sultan ever wanted to go out on a procession, he would ride an elephant. But back to the horses. Now, horses were coming to the subcontinent via two routes. One was the sea route, where horses were imported from the Gujarati ports in the ships of the Nakhodas or the Novitikas, basically ship owners such as rich merchants or the Sultans of Gujarat, the Sultans of Delhi. These ships sailed all the way to the Gulf of Arabia to bring back Arabian horses, the high-bred Arabi ghodas that were so sought after. It's not for no reason that young Jugal Hansraj crooned, "घोड़ा अपना तगड़ा है, देखो कितनी चर्बी है, चलता है मेहरौली में पर घोड़ा अपना अरबी है, टकबक टकबक, टकबक टकबक." I just love saying this, you guys. But what's with the diss on Mehruli? I was born there, you guys. It's a great place. Anyway, the transportation of horses via sea wasn't easy. Many horses would perish in the journey on the sea, the cost for which was squarely levied on the nakhodas, the ship owners. But they didn't seem to mind, considering the cost of the horses dying on the sea far outweighed the high price that many people were willing to pay for these horses in the subcontinent. The other route was the overland trade route, connecting the subcontinent to Central Asia and bringing the Tatari horses. Now, the Tatari horses weren't even half as good as the Arabian horses, but they were still far better than whatever the subcontinent had. It was via this overland route that the kingdom of Ghazni came into contact with Gujarat and got Muizzuddin Ghur or Muhammad Ghuri interested. Inscriptional evidence tells us that Muhammad Ghuri, referred to as the Hamira or the Amir of the Turushkas, the Turks, attacked Anhilwada, the Chalukyan capital of Gujarat, but was summarily defeated by Mool Raja II, the Chalukyan ruler of Gujarat. Back home, Ghuri was advised that in order to make up for his losses at Anhilwada, he should confiscate the wealth of a rich merchant prince, a man called Vasa Abhira, who had strong trade relationships with Ghazni or Ghazna. But Ghori refused, saying it would be unlawful to confiscate his wealth at Ghazni. Smart move, Ghori. Not wise to mess with a rich merchant prince. They were very powerful in Gujarat and wielded considerable influence on whatever trade they were involved in. And by the time Qutbuddin Aibak, the man who, if you remember, built the first stories of the Qutub Minar, sacked Anhilwada in 1197 AD to avenge his master, Muhammad Ghuri's defeat, Arab merchants were deeply entrenched in the milieu of Gujarat. It was in this milieu that the first major religious groups that came to monopolize the Gujarati trade were the Ismailis. Not only were they involved in the sea trade via Egypt, where the Ismaili Fatimid Caliphate had a stronghold, but also controlled the land trade route via Sindh and Multan. Apart from bringing in trade and settling in various parts of Gujarat, the first Islamic structures in India were also associated with the Ismailis. These were a set of buildings that came up in Bhadreshvar, a town in the Kutch area of Gujarat. These buildings have been dated by inscription to the latter half of the 12th century. But it is likely that buildings facilitating the Muslim merchants in Gujarat were built even before the 12th century, considering Islam came in contact with the subcontinent in the latter half of the 7th century. This is attested by Al-Masudi, an Arab geographer who, on his visit to Cambay in 916 AD, informs us that he found a large Muslim population coming from cities such as Siraf, Oman, Baghdad, as well as Basra, settled in Cambay. He also informs us that many coastal cities of Gujarat had mosques with Jummah prayers or Friday prayers being observed. However, the buildings at Bhadreshvar are the oldest extant monuments associated with the Muslim merchants of Gujarat. In this regard, the Shrine of Ibrahim, locally known as the Dargah of Lal Shahbaz, is one such example. Now, before you get too excited, this Lal Shahbaz is not the Lal Shahbaz of Sindhidi da, Sehwadi da, Shekhe Shehbaz Kalandar, Damadam Mast Kalandar. That guy is buried in Sehwan, Sindh, Pakistan. Frankly, one does not know how the misnomer of Lal Shahbaz Dargah came to be applied to the monument. But whatever the local name, the monument is absolutely fascinating. Consisting of a tomb and a building with a mihrab, possibly a mosque, the monument is a curious mix. For those who are unaware, a mihrab is a prayer niche in a mosque. Carved out of its western wall, one sits in front of the mihrab and prays, facing west, which is the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca. But back to the monument. Wolpert informs us that the inscription on the mihrab building identifies a certain Ibrahim who ordered the construction of the building in 1160 AD. Accordingly, scholars refer to the building as the Shrine of Ibrahim. But who was this Ibrahim? He is identified as Ibrahim al-Hamidi, the Ismaili Dai, which is basically the leader of a religious mission. Ibrahim Hamidi was the Dai of Yemen, Sindh, as well as India. Built in 1160, this particular building is at least 35 to 37 years before Aibak would build the Qutb Congregational Mosque, clearly making the Shrine of Ibrahim the earliest extant Islamic monument in the subcontinent. Furthermore, the building also bears a throne verse, the Ayat al-Kursi, a Quranic verse that literally talks about Allah's Kursi extending over the heavens and the earth. But this verse is ubiquitously inscribed on many monuments in the Islamic world. Even our very own Delhi Sultan, Iltutmish, when he built a massive arched screen to the Qutb complex, had the Ayat al-Kursi inscribed on the arch. In this sense, the Ayat al-Kursi is said to have apotropic or protective function. And inscribing it on monuments would protect them from buri nazar. Now for the architecture. The building is curiously built. Large blocks of stone stacked one on top of the other with only dry masonry in between. The dome is pyramidal and the interior of the building has no columns or pillars. The mihrab projects outwards, which, as Mehrdad Shokoohy informs us, is following an arrangement found in the Ayyubid tomb of Abu Mansur in Egypt. Clearly, the Fatimid Egyptian influence that the Ismailis such as Ibrahim brought to the subcontinent is visible right here. However, fused with the Egyptian influence are the building traditions of the local builders of Gujarat. Shokoohy tells us that the decorative motifs on the pillars are quite similar to those used in Jaina architecture, which makes sense considering Bhadreshvar was a very important Jain pilgrim center. In fact, Bhadreshvar was briefly also ruled by a Jain merchant prince, a man called Jagadu. Jagadu, 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 Jagadu. I'm going with Jagadu. Also known as Jagadeva, but I must still call him Jagadu, because Ma channel, Ma rules. Now our man Jagadu, I really like this guy, you guys. I really like him. You'll see why. Our man Jagadu was such an influential 12th century merchant prince of Bhadreshvar that they wrote a whole biography for him in the 14th century titled the Jagadu Charita. The bio reads like a fantasy tale, which makes sense. All good stories deserve embellishment. The bio reads like a fantasy tale in parts, where Jagadu, a sea merchant, is often helped by the ocean gods. But that's no reason to not believe the many historical details that the Jagadu Charit provides us with. Now, our man Jagadu, according to his illustrious biography, was a Shrimali Jain who defeated a full-blown army led by a certain Pithadeva. This led our Jagadu to become the ruler of Bhadreshvar. The governor of Bhadreshvar. Come on, let's not be this literal when trying to understand a 14th century biography, almost a eulogy, written for a 12th century merchant prince. Gujarat at this point of time was being ruled by the Chalukya rulers, as we have already discussed. So the maximum that they could have offered our rich merchant prince Jagadu was the governorship of Bhadreshvar. But not all was bliss between Jagadu and the Chalukya rulers. Jagadu, being the merchant prince that he was, kept horses. Now this would have certainly triggered the Chalukya rulers, who had a royal diktat that horses and keeping horses or riding horses was only the royal preserve in Gujarat. Seeing Jagadu going in the streets of Bhadreshvar would not have made a very nice sight for the Chalukyas. But the hilarious imagery aside, it's quite obvious that the wealthy merchant prince as well as rulers of Gujarat, the two foci of power, would have clashed from time to time. Coming back to Jagadu from the Jagadu Charita, his biography also credits him with having opened his 700 granaries during a massive famine that afflicted large parts of the subcontinent. Among Jagadu's benefactors was also the Hamira of Sindh, the Amir of Sindh, clearly indicating that Jagadu was good friends with the merchants and rulers of Sindh. Additionally, once the governor of Bhadreshvar, Jagadu also greatly constructed and repaired the remains of the city that had suffered due to the attack of his adversary Pithadeva. Among Jagadu's building projects was the reparation of an old temple, as well as the building of a vav, a stepwell, and a masjid or a mosque in 1166 AD for the Shimali on account of their wealth. The reference to the Shimali here are the Ismailis, especially the merchants who clearly traded with Jagadu and brought him considerable wealth. The mosque was therefore built to facilitate prayers for the Ismaili merchants that stayed in Bhadreshvar. Located very close to the shrine of Ibrahim, this mosque is locally known as the Khimli Masjid and more technically known as the Sola Khambi Mosque. Khimli again is a reference to the Ismailis. The Vav, also mentioned in the Jagadu Charita, is next to the mosque and is called today the Dudha Vav. Tombs next to the mosque are variously dated to 1177 AD, 1227 as well as 1231 AD. Judging by the info of the Jagadu Charita, it is likely, as Shokoohy points out, that the construction of the mosque started in 1166 AD and finished sometime before 1177 AD. The same date range could be furthered for the Vav. This would then put the Khimli Masjid as having been built at least 20 years before Qutbuddin Aibak built his congregational mosque in Delhi. The Qibli Mosque is flat-roofed and built in a trabeated, a post and lintel kind of architecture, which was the local architecture of the subcontinent before the Turks came in and introduced the arcuate, the domenage architecture. Clearly then, just like the shrine of Ibrahim, local builders and local building practices influenced the architecture of the mosque patronized by our man Jagru. And as if these two earliest Islamic structural marvels are not enough, a third, known as the Choti Masjid, is also standing close to these monuments. Its mihrab juts out just like the mihrab of the shrine of Ibrahim. Accordingly, Shokoohy, Wolpert and others date this closer to 1160 AD, which is also the date of the shrine of Ibrahim. Absolutely fascinating. These three buildings in Bhadreshvar are of course a lot more than just the earliest extant Islamic structures in India. They are representative of a time when the local Gujarati merchants worked with and lived alongside the Ismaili merchants. They speak of a time where the rich and the influential of Gujarat, such as Jagru, felt necessary that the Ismaili merchants were made to feel at home, facilitating them with their place of worship. But most of all, these stand testament to a Gujarat of acculturation, intermingling of the various forms of its architecture, and inclusive of a varied populace and their different religious practices. That, however, is not just the story of Gujarat, but most of the subcontinent's history, no matter what a random Ramesh tries to tell you now. And that is all that I have for you today. Please remember, if whatever I spoke in today's video sparked your curiosity on Bhadreshvar, then there are a few sources listed in the description box that you can refer to. And do visit Bhadreshvar, you guys. I've been wanting to visit it for a very, very long time now. And before you just walk away, please like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. Do let me know in the comments section what topic of history would you like me to speak about in the next video. Bye.